Welcome to Movie Speeching. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take good care. Island of Dr. Moreau is the name of the movie. Please like and subscribe to get every update. The last survivor after a plane crash was rescued by a stranger and taken to a mysterious island. But few people know that this island is the natural laboratory of a scientist. Crazy School specializes in creating deadly monsters. Edward Douglas was a young man traveling across the South Seas when his plane crashed into the Java Sea. Edward continued to wander in the lifeboat with two other men. On Saturday, Edward's friends began fighting over the last box of food. Edward tried to stop them, but they also started beating him. Finally, the two men fell into the water and were eaten by sharks. Edward was hungry and tired and suddenly lost consciousness. He opened his eyes on a boat where he met a guy named Montgomery. It was he who saved Edward and also gave him first aid. Edward introduced himself as a United Nations negotiator to Jakarta. He asked for a radio, but unfortunately it was not on the ship. However, Montgomery was willing to pay the captain to drop Edward off on the island of Timor, where he would certainly find a way to contact his team. He gave Edward a medical injection that put him in a deep sleep. When he opened his eyes, he was on Dr. Moreau's island, where Montgomery lived. He suggested that Edward use his radio instead of going deeper into Timor. Edward accepts and they get in the jeep. First, they stopped at a rabbit pen, where Montgomery released the rabbits he had brought with him. Most of the people living here are vegetarians, but Montgomery kills one of the rabbits to prepare a hearty meal for Edward. He takes Edward to his station where he has a radio, but it needs repair. Montgomery assured him that he would have it repaired soon and advised Edward to stay at the station until then. He looked around and found a series of certificates and medals bearing Dr. Moreau's name. Suddenly, he noticed a beautiful girl dancing in the hallway. Edward couldn't take his eyes off her and continued to stare at her for a while. Suddenly, the young girl saw him and jumped up. Then, out of nowhere, she began to admire Edward's hands. Before Edward could speak to her, she ran to see Montgomery. It's Isa, Dr. Moreau's daughter, who likes to be alone. Montgomery arranged a room for Edward to rest. Edward asked about the medals because he thought Dr. Moreau was dead. Montgomery told him that Dr. Moreau had suddenly disappeared so that he could safely conduct research on the animals on the island. It's been 17 years, so most people think he's dead. When Montgomery left, Edward noticed his bedroom door was locked. All the windows were also stopped by iron bars. Luckily, Edward had been in situations like this before. He used a pen and a mirror to unlock the door. He sneaked around and found a giant laboratory. Several different species of animals are kept there as well as many fetuses growing in the tube. But what Edward saw next gave him the biggest shock of his life. A team of doctors help a woman give birth. It is not human or animal. It seems to be a combination of both. Even doctors are human-animal hybrids. They noticed Edward and ran after him. As Edward leaves the lab, he meets Isa, who offers to help him. They kept running until they reached the edge of the sea. The hybrids were still chasing him, so Isa decided to find shelter. She takes Edward back to the forest where they meet a mutant baboon named Assassin. He can speak like a human and agrees to help Edward after seeing he has 5 fingers. Mutation calls humans 5 men. Assassin took them back to his village and they all went down to the basement to meet their sage, the Sayer of Law. He gathered all the mutants and advised them not to lose their human characteristics, otherwise they would become complete animals without a sense of morality. Isa asks the law seller to help her hide Edward, but before she can, Montgomery and the others get there to capture Edward. Accompanying them was a chubby man whom everyone called Dad. He ordered Montgomery to give Edward a gun. Edward pointed at his father, but Essa stood in his way. Edward was confused, so his father asked him to return to the compound so they could talk about the details. Anyway, the father can't stand the sunlight. After arriving at the compound, the father removes the white cream from his face and reveals that he is actually Dr. Moreau. He had to apply cream because he was allergic to the sun. It also introduced 3 other hybrids, Wagoi, Azazello, and Myling, which Dr. Moreau considered his children. Another small hybrid named Magi couldn't speak but offered to shake his hand. Edward lost his mind and couldn't believe what he saw with his eyes. He started to panic and kept asking questions. Dr. Moreau says that it's impossible to explain 17 years of research in a few minutes, so for now, it's enough for Edward to know that all of these hybrids live under Dr. Moreau's care and protection. These are actually animals that have been fused with human genes by a scientific study conducted by Dr. Moreau himself. Edward is still frightened and says that this research is more like the devil's work. Dr. Moreau advised him to rest before dinner so he could digest the information he had just received. Meanwhile, Moreau and his favorite hybrid Magi play the piano. After an hour, Edward came to the table where Myling was reading a passage from a strange book about hybrids. Dr. Moreau then asked Edward if he still thought this research was the work of the devil. While Edward stands by his statement, Dr. Moreau explains that in the work of the devil there is destruction and degradation, but that does not exist on this island. For 17 years Moreau tried to produce a certain perfection in humanity. He studied human DNA and concluded that demons were nothing more than a boring collection of genes. Edward is not convinced and says that none of this nonsense can justify the monstrous experiment being conducted on the island. Moreau advised Edward to be careful and keep an eye on Magi and the two other half-breeds living in the compound. They are in complete harmony, and this is done using genetic engineering. Moreau is just a few steps away from doing the same with humans so that this world is no longer violent. Suddenly, Azazello brought the rabbit that Montgomery asked him to cook. Dr. Moreau ordered him to be brought back immediately. To maintain peace between the hybrids, a strict law was established on the island, according to which no one is allowed to kill anyone. Hearing that, Isa said that she also saw a rabbit being killed in the forest and suspected that the leopard hybrid Lomai was behind this act. Dr. Moreau is really upset to hear this and orders all the hybrids to be gathered tomorrow morning. He must remind them of the law. Edward fell asleep, but his nightmares did not give him a moment of peace. The next morning, all the halflings gathered in front of the compound and the speaker of the law read the law aloud. They are not allowed to kill for pleasure or hatred, nor are they allowed to kill anything at any time. This is the ultimate law. After the speech, Dr. Moreau tells everyone that someone broke the law and killed a rabbit. He must be punished. Then he called Lomai to come forward. Lomai is afraid of punishment and attacks Dr. Moreau, but Moreau is able to control them with a remote control that causes a sudden pain throughout the bodies of all hybrids. Despite Lomai's behavior, Dr. Moreau still showed kindness and forgave Lomai. However, Azazello kills him because he wants to protect the law. Lomai's body was burned and her close friend Hyena cried while holding the remains. Suddenly he noticed a small computer chip in the corpse. The hyena rubbed his body and realized there was a computer chip under his skin. Dr. Moreau uses it to shock the hybrids into submission. The hyena takes out his chip and decides to rebel against his guardian. Later that day, Edward accompanied Montgomery as he injected the hybrid drug. It's the combination of hormones that helps the hybrid stay calm. Montgomery was a neurosurgeon but quit his job to accompany Dr. Moreau in creating a perfect human race. Montgomery suddenly noticed Hyena and called her to receive the shock, but Hyena revealed that he had removed the implanted chip. Montgomery ran after him with the tranquilizer gun. The hyena had to be captured before telling all the hybrids about the implant, but unfortunately he escaped. Meanwhile, Edward asks Wagway to help repair the radio communication system. Montgomery achieved that with the essential part of making radio work. He is not willing to give it to anyone. He tells Edward to try to understand the situation and give up the idea of running away with Isa. She may not look like it, but she is a hybrid cat and also needs injections to remove her animal characteristics. Edward wanted to know why he was brought here, but Montgomery did not answer him. That evening, Isa went to her father and told him that his animal characteristics were growing stronger. He advised her not to worry because she was still beautiful. Dr. Moreau spoke peacefully to his daughter and did not know what was going on behind his back. The hyena told several other hybrids about the implant and they all removed it. They then broke into the compound and started exploring everything. Dr. Moreau arrived and treated them very kindly. He also played a piano tune for them, but the hybrids looked at him fearfully. They asked him who they were and if he was their father, then why he shocked them. Dr. Moreau begins to get scared and gradually walks away and takes his shock control equipment. When the hybrid approached him, he immediately pressed the button. However, nothing happened. The hybrids have accepted the fact that they are not men and they will not let anyone force them to act like men. They want to make their own rules, move and eat like animals. Having said this, they attacked Dr. Moreau and killed him mercilessly. Edward goes there and shoots into the air to scare the half-bloods. Isa is truly sad about her father's death. In addition, her animal hormones become stronger. She needs a special serum to get rid of them. Edward agrees to help and rushes to the lab to find the serum. There he met Montgomery, who had drunk too much and lost his mind. He dresses like Dr. Moreau and repeats his words. He tells Edward that he has destroyed all the serum, so there is no way to stop Isa from turning into a wild animal. Meanwhile, the hybrids burn down the seaport so that no one can reach the island. Azazello arrives to stop them, but Hyena tortures him with a shock device. He then asks her to be part of their team. Now they must go to the village and tell all the halflings that it is time for them to rule the island. Montgomery arrives first and hands out food to the hybrids while repeating random words Dr. Moreau is saying. Azazello arrives and is hugged by Montgomery, who tells him that Dr. Moreau wanted to turn animals into humans, but he forgot that a species' instincts cannot be changed. He will hunt, kill, and rule as his ancestors did. Azazello agreed and shot and killed Montgomery. Meanwhile, Edward searches for a medicine to cure Isa's illness, but finds his own DNA sample in the laboratory. He meets Isa and tells her that he always thought Montgomery saved his life, but in reality, Montgomery needed Edward's DNA to suppress Isa's hormones. It has been used all along. They must escape before the hybrid reaches the compound. Fortunately, Wagoi, Myling, and Magi remained loyal to Father and protected Isa. When the halflings arrived, they burned the compound, but Edward and Isa escaped. They went to the village's basement to search for the Sayer of Law, but Azazello caught them. He kills Isa and transports Edward to their new leader, Lomai. Edward tricks Lomai and tells him that he cannot become leader until other powerful hybrids are alive. Lomai fell into the trap and started killing her accomplices. The hybrids realized that Lomai was their true enemy and decided to disobey him anymore. Sayer of Law volunteers to care for the hybrids and teach them to live peacefully. The next day, Edward built a boat to leave the island. He suggests inviting more scientists and doctors who can help the hybrids, but Sayer of Law declines the offer. The hybrids must accept what they are, not what Dr. Moreau wants to create them for. Several years have passed and Edward has somewhat forgotten the incident, but whenever he looked at the humans around him, he saw them as wild hybrids. They also kill each other, are more unstable and dangerous than any creature Dr. Moreau has ever created. Thank you for watching. See you on the next video.